Hello everyone, I am Mary May A. Guerrilius, and the topic that was assigned to me is Assessing English as a Lingua Franca by Jenkins and Leung. First of all, let's take a look at the table of contents that I've prepared. So first we have here the introduction, historical context, conceptual approaches, challenges and progress in ELF assessment, future directions, and conclusion. First, let us define ELF. Well, ELF stands for English as a lingua franca. It is using English as an international contact language between speakers whose first languages are different. ELF communication transcends national or first language boundaries. So let me explain it to you furthermore to for you to be able to understand what is ELF. Well, just like what I've said earlier, English as a lingua franca or ELF refers to the use of English as a common means of communication between speakers who have different first languages. In today's globalized world, people from various linguistic backgrounds frequently interact, and ELF serves as a bridge that allows them to communicate effectively despite their linguistic differences. So, one of significant aspect of ELF is that it transcends national and first language boundaries, meaning that ELF is not confined or limited to a specific country or a region where English is traditionally spoken, such as USA, UK, or Australia. Instead, it operates on a global scale, enabling speakers from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds to connect, collaborate, and share. Say, for an instance, we, the Filipinos, our first language is Filipino. On the other hand, people from Japan speaks Japanese as their first language. But we were able to communicate and understand each other with the presence of English as our lingua franca. Now, an important major point of ELF is that the majority of the ELF users are non native speakers of English. We have here a trivia. Did you know that according to the current statistics, approximately 1.5 billion people worldwide speak English? Now, while there are around 400 million native English speakers means that these countries or these people speaks English as their first language. Now, while there are around 400 million native English speakers, the majority of the users are non-native speakers. So can you imagine that? Non-native speakers dominate in using English. Now, let us proceed with the key features of ELF. First is the diversity and emergent nature. Now, ELF interactions are dynamic and context dependent, often shaped by linguistic backgrounds and communicative needs of the participants involved. Unlike traditional English, which is governed by a fixed grammatical rules and native speaker norms, ELF is flexible and adaptable. It evolves in real time as speakers negotiate meaning and adjust their language use to achieve mutual understanding. Therefore, ELF is not easily captured by static norms, such as standard grammar rules or native speaker pronunciation models. Now, this is a challenge to traditional assessment methods. It often focus on measuring proficiency based on native speaker standards, or the one that I mentioned earlier about the pronunciation and other grammar rules, traditional assessments typically emphasize grammatical accuracy, vocabulary usage, and pronunciation that align with native varieties of English. Now, let's proceed with the historical context of ELF, which involves the early developments in the world Englishes. The study of world Englishes, or WE, played a significant role in laying the foundation for English as a lingua franca, or ELF, research. The WE scholars, or world Englishes, explored the many varieties of English that emerged due to colonization, globalization, and international communication, challenging the traditional view that native speaker varieties such as British or American English were the only legitimate forms of English. So it is a belief or a foundation that believes that um, there are other Englishes across the world. Therefore, they are debunking the thought that there's only native speaker varieties, or the countries such as America or British American or British English. So it is not limited on those two only. Now, let's proceed with the point that early researchers in the world Englishes questioned the dominance of native speaker norms in language assessment. So, why? Well, scholars like Lewinberg highlighted that non native varieties of English often reflect cultural and communicative needs, and therefore it should not be dismissed as incorrect or substandard. Instead, these varieties represent legitimate and functional norms of English in their own right. So, we have here an example. Furnitures, luggages, and equipments are plural forms that are considered to be incorrect in native varieties of English, but they are most commonly used in many native English contexts. So, traditional language tests, which are based on native speaker standards, would penalize such usage. Why? Because they are adhering to the standard or grammatical rules that was being set by the native speakers. However, World English's researchers argued that these forms are acceptable and meaningful within the local linguistic environments where they are used, challenging the rigidity of conventional language assessment. So, just like what Mr. Kabilinov said during his discussion, and what I've answered during the oral recitation, as long as a language is being shared and understood by a lot of people, it has already served its purpose, which is to communicate or to express thoughts and ideas with other people. Now, I have prepared here the Kashmir model for the three Englishes. For inner circle, we have UK, Ireland, USA, Canada, Australia, South Africa. For outer circle, we have India, Singapore, Malaysia, and Nigeria. And lastly, we have here the expanding circle, which involves China, Russia, Brazil, Europe, and Asia. Now, as you can see in the model, he initially distinguished this. However, Lowenberg later advocated for the recognition of what we call local norms in both circles. So he emphasized here that each variety of English, regardless of where it is spoken, should be assessed within its own context rather than against native speaker benchmarks or the standard that was being set. So we have here a point wherein the historical context is important to ELF studies because ELF extends the principles of world Englishes into global or intercultural communication, while WE or World Englishes focuses on localized varieties of English. ELF highlights the dynamic and adaptive use of English in international settings where speakers from diverse linguistic backgrounds negotiate meaning in real time. Now let's proceed to the challenge of variability. ELF is characterized by its variably variable nature. So, what do we mean when we say variably variable nature? So, this phrase encapsulates the dynamic and ever changing characteristics of ELF communication. Unlike traditional notions of language where rules are fixed and stable, ELF interactions are fluid, flexible, continuously adapting to the participants, context, and communicative goals at hand. The variability arises only because ELF is not where I was I think because ELF is used by speakers from diverse linguistic backgrounds, each bringing their own linguistic resources and cultural influences. As a result, there was no single no single standardized form of ELF exists. Instead, the language is shaped and reshaped during each interaction, making it inherently unpredictable and context dependent. Now, a crucial aspect of ELF communication is often co constructed online through negotiation and accommodation. What does it mean? Well, this term, co constructed online, is a term that emphasizes the real time collaboration nature of ELF interactions. Participants actively negotiate meaning and accommodate each other's linguistic preferences and proficiencies during the conversations. This means that rather than adhering to the pre established language rules such as grammar, pronunciation, ELF users adjust their language use dynamically to ensure mutual understanding, by simplifying grammar, modifying pronunciation, or borrowing expressions as needed. Now, this is a variability that poses a significant challenge for traditional language assessment, which typically relies on stable norms such as grammar rules, native speaker pronunciation, and predefined vocabulary list. So, conventional tests are designed to measure a learner's proficiency based on these stable benchmarks. However, ELF ELF's flexible and context-driven nature makes it difficult to assess during using the traditional methods as it prioritizes the communicative effectiveness over grammatical perfection or native-like fluency. Now, Bloomberg's concept of repertoire is a key here that ELF users draw on a range of linguistic resources. So, it is particularly relevant in understanding this challenge. According to Bloomberg, linguistic repertoire refers to the diverse set of linguistic resources that individuals draw upon during communication. Now, in the context of ELF, users rely on a wide range of linguistic tools such as different languages, dialects, slang, gestures, and even cultural references to facilitate interaction. ELF users do not define on a single language system. Why? They creatively mix and match elements from their repertoire to achieve effective communication. Now, this concept reinforces the idea that ELF is not about conforming to a singular linguistic norm, but leveraging diverse resources to navigate intercultural communication successfully. Therefore, assessing ELF users based on fixed criteria overlooks the adaptive and resourceful strategies they employ, highlighting the need for a more flexible and context sensitive approaches to language assessment. Now, let's proceed to the next topic. We have here critical language testing or CLT. Critical language testing is an approach that questions the fairness, validity, and power dynamics embedded in traditional language testing practices. So, scholars in this field argue that mainly conventional language assessments are built on a monolingual bias, which means that it favors the native speaker norms, particularly those people who are speaking dominant varieties such as British and American English. This bias inherently disadvantages the speakers who use English as a lingua franca or ELF, as their language use often diverges from these idealized native standards. In traditional language tests, proficiency is frequently measured by how closely a test taker's language aligns with native speaker models in areas such as grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary. However, ELF speakers who come from the diverse linguistic backgrounds often employ creative and adaptive strategies that may not conform to these standards but are still effective for communication. As a result, ELF users are often unfairly penalized despite demonstrating communicative competence in real world multilingual contexts. Now, McNamara and others have called for a revolution in terms of language testing because they advocate for an assessment that would reflect the realities of ELF communication. They emphasize the importance of developing testing frameworks that are flexible, inclusive, and context sensitive, such as assessments that would evaluate a test taker's ability to negotiate meaning, adapt language use, and draw on diverse linguistic resources, which are a key features of ELF interactions, rather than solely measuring adherence to native speaker norms. In essence, CLT challenges the status quo of language assessment and pushes a more just and inclusive approach that values linguistic diversity and recognizes global role in English as a lingua franca. Next, we have multilingualism and translanguaging. Research on lingualism provides crucial insights for ELF assessment, is as it emphasizes the importance of recognizing and valuing multilingual competence. Now, concepts like dynamic bilingualism and translanguaging highlight the fluid and interconnected nature of language use in multilingual contexts. Now, Jenkins' concept of ELF3 emphasizes the inherently multilingual nature of ELF communication. Now, let's start with the term multilingual competence. It is the ability of the individuals to navigate multiple languages fluidly and effectively, often within a single interaction. Now, one of the key attributes of multilingualism research is its emphasis on the said multilingual competence. Now, traditional language assessments have historically prioritized monolingual standards, focusing on the proficiency in a single language, often measured against the native speaker norms. However, in today's globalized world, many speakers operate the multilingual environments where they draw on various languages as resources of communication. Now, ELF interactions often occur in this multilingual context, where speakers use English alongside other languages in a flexible and adaptive manner. Now, when we say dynamic bilingualism and translanguaging, these concepts are central to understanding this fluidity. Why? Dynamic bilingualism challenges the traditional notion that bilinguals maintain strict boundaries within their language. Instead, it recognizes that bilinguals and multilinguals constantly shift the blend languages based on the communicative context. This view aligns closely with ELF communication, where speakers frequently adopt their language use depending on their interlocutors and situational needs. Now, for the translanguaging, this idea takes further by highlighting the interconnected nature of language use in multilingual context. Now, for Jenkins' concept of ELF3, it emphasizes the inherently multilingual nature of ELF communication. Jenkins argued that ELF should not be viewed as a simplified version of English, but is a complex multilingual practice where speakers draw on diverse linguistic repertoires. ELF3 highlights that ELF users are not just proficient in English, but they are skilled at managing multiple languages simultaneously, using them as tools to enhance communication, build relationships, and negotiate meaning across the linguistic and cultural boundaries. Now let's proceed with the research on ELF assessment. Now, despite the growing recognition of ELF, research specifically on assessment of ELF remains limited. Now, several scholars have called for a fundamental re-evaluation of assessment practices in light of ELF research. Chopin's suggestion to ignore language form highlights the need to focus on communicative effectiveness rather than the grammatical accuracy. Why? Well, in ELF context, successful communication is often achieved through strategies like simplifying language, using gestures, or clarifying meaning, even if the language used is not grammatically perfect. Ignoring language form in assessments would mean valuing the ability to convey ideas clearly and collaborate effectively over the adherence to a rigid grammatical structure. Now, Newbold's work on online testing demonstrates the possibilities and challenges of ELF assessment. Now, online platforms offer new opportunities for assessing ELF communication, such as what? Simulating real world interactions, incorporating multimodal elements such as text, audio, and video, and enabling collaborative tasks that mirror authentic ELF use. However, Challenges remain, such as ensuring fairness, maintaining reliability, and designing assessments that truly capture the dynamic of ELF communication. And finally, in Hall's concept of English thing calls for a shift from testing knowledge of English to testing what learners can do in English. Now, English thing it presents a transformative approach to English assessment. Hall advocates a shift from testing the learner's knowledge of English, such as their command, vocabulary, and pronunciation, to assessing what learners can do with English in practical and real world situations. Now, this concept aligns the core principles of ELF, where the primary goal is to effectively communicate rather than to adhere in the linguistic perfection. Now, English Thing emphasizes performance based assessment, focusing on learners' ability to engage in conversations, to solve problems, and convey information across linguistic and cultural boundaries using English as a tool. In conclusion, in summary, ELF research on assessment is still evolving. Now, scholars like Chopin, Newbold, and Hall provide valuable insights into how language testing can be reimagined to better reflect the realities of ELF communication. Moving forward, there is a clear need for more research and innovation in this area to develop assessments that are fair, inclusive, and represents the diverse ways of English is in English globally. Next, we have here the ELF and CEFR. The Common European Framework of Reference or CEFR is a widely used language proficiency framework. It is also being scrutinized in the light of ELF. Why? It is because of the fact that CEFR focuses on functional competence over native like accuracy. Now, scholars from Jennings' um, study proposed revising descriptors to emphasize communication strategies, negotiation meaning, negotiation of meaning, and linguistic flexibility. Now, this shift would ensure that CEFR better reflects the diverse and dynamic nature of English, which is being used globally today. Now, McNamara and others have criticized the CEFR for its implicit reliance on native speaker norms. Now, CEFR values fluency, accuracy, and vocabulary typical of native varieties such as British or American English. Now, these possess a challenges of ELF users because their strength often lies on adaptability, clarity, and intercultural competence, which is often overlooked, just like what I've said earlier, in CEFR based assessments. Now, let's proceed to the future implications to improve the assessments or improve the assessment in English as a lingua franca. First, we have to prioritize communicative effectiveness. How well do speakers achieve their goals? Second, we have to center translanguaging and multilingualism. We have to recognize the ELF speakers' rich repertoire. Now, let's try to explore alternative assessments, which involves portfolios, performance tasks, and collaborative projects. Next, foster collaboration. Researchers, testers, and boards working together. So it is important for them to further create more studies, and collaborate with each other to improve the assessment of ELF. Next is to embrace the ELF reality. We have to ensure assessment that reflects how English is actually used, valuing linguistic diversity and promoting intercultural understanding. Now, assessing English as a lingua franca presents significant challenges due to its dynamic and diverse nature. Unlike traditional language systems that bounds stable grammatical rules and standardized norms, ELF is fluid, evolving continuously as speakers from different linguistic backgrounds adapt their language to use to meet the needs of each interaction. Now, this raises a fundamental question. How do we assess something that is in a constant flux? One of the key challenges is lack of fixed norms. Now, traditional standardized assessments are, excuse me, traditional standard assessment rely on a well-defined criteria such as grammatical accuracy, native-like pronunciation, and standardized vocabulary. Another challenge is balancing local norms with international understanding. Now, assessment frameworks must therefore account to both local variations and the need for a certain level of global comprehensibility, which is a balance that is challenging to achieve. Finally, designing practical and valid ELF assessments requires further research. Current assessment models are not equipped to measure adaptability, creativity, and strategic competence that characterize ELF communication. Future research needs to explore innovative approaches such as performance based assessments, dynamic tasks, and technology enhanced testing. The real world ELF usage. Now, developing such assessments will ensure that ELF users are evaluated fairly based on the ability to navigate multilingual interactions rather than their conformity to native speaker norms. The future of ELF assessment calls for a shift from the traditional methods to frameworks that reflects the real world use. So, just like what I've said earlier, we have to prioritize communicative effectiveness. Why? It is to ensure that we are focusing on how well speakers achieve their goals and not their adherence to native norms. Now, for alternative assessments like for portfolios, performance tasks, and collaborative projects, in this manner, we are offering holistic ways to evaluate ELF competence through real-world tasks and interactions. This shift requires collaboration among researchers, testers, and boards to develop practical inclusive methods. Finally, upon embracing reality, it ensures that assessments reflect the global English use rather and valuing the linguistic diversity and even promoting intercultural understanding. Now, in conclusion, ELF presents a significant challenge, but more importantly, a transformative opportunity for language assessment. Now, the traditional reliance on a fixed norms and native speaker models is no longer adequate in a world where English functions primarily as a lingua franca. As we've explored, and just like what explained earlier, the dynamic and diverse nature of ELF demands a fundamental paradigm shift. We must move beyond assessing conformity to single standard and embrace the rich linguistic repertoires of ELF speakers. By working together, we can develop assessments that are not only effective and equitable, but truly reflect the way English is used in the world today, empowering English as a lingua franca speakers and fostering intercultural understanding. Now, upon embracing the ELF reality, it is not just about adopting our assessment practices, but recognizing and celebrating the vibrant diversity of English in the 21st century. That's it for assessing English as a lingua franca. I hope you have understood our topic for today. These are the references from the journal that Sir has given, and same resources as the same topic about assessment of English as a lingua franca. So that's it. Thank you for listening. I hope that you have understood and you will put inside your mind or you will use what you have learned today upon teaching someday, because learning without doing or without applying is not does not show that you're an effective learner and not an effective teacher rather. Thank you.